The base was alive with noise, a constant hum of jet engines and the distant clatter of boots on asphalt, yet the moment she appeared, it was as if the air itself stilled. Sunlight poured over the tarmac, glinting off the wings of an F-22 parked at the far end of the runway, and cut across her frame like a spotlight. She walked with purpose, not hurried, not hesitant, but with the steady stride of someone who knew exactly where she belonged, even if everyone else thought otherwise. Her boots carried the grit of travel, her jacket hung loose over one shoulder, and a faint streak of oil brushed across her cheek as though she had stepped straight out of a cockpit and onto center stage. The Admiral saw her before anyone else. He was a tall, broad man, his presence larger than the metals clinking lightly against his chest. Age had hardened his face, but his eyes were still sharp, still capable of cutting a man, or a woman, in half without a blade. His voice carried across the flight line, cold and clipped. "Lieutenant, stop right there." Every step around her seemed to falter. Ground crews turned their heads, SEALs paused mid-conversation, even a few pilots cut their stride short. The weight of his authority was enough to freeze the air. She stopped, her chin tilting just slightly, eyes narrowing not out of defiance, but out of curiosity. "You don't belong here," the Admiral said, each word struck like a hammer against steel. "This base is not your playground, and I don't tolerate strays wandering my runway. Gather your gear and get off my installation." That's an order. The words were meant to humiliate. Everyone on base knew the Admiral's reputation. He was the kind of man who had ended careers before they had even begun, who believed discipline was not taught but enforced. If you didn't fit into the mold, he crushed you until you did, or he threw you out. No one challenged him. Not captains, not colonels, not even the seasoned SEAL commanders who carried decades of silent operations under their belts. His word was law. The young woman didn't flinch. Not once. She let his words settle into the dust and fade like background noise. She shifted the jacket more securely onto her shoulder, her posture loose but unshaken, as though she were watching a storm from inside a quiet room. Around them, the crowd of uniforms grew thicker, and whispers began to weave through the air. "Who is she? She's not Air Force. Look at her patch. She's about to get chewed alive." Someone chuckled nervously. "Dead girl walking." The Admiral's voice grew sharper. "I don't like repeating myself. You heard me, Lieutenant. You were dismissed from this installation. Leave, now." Her lips curved, not quite into a smile, more like the ghost of one, the kind that carried weight and mystery. She didn't argue. She didn't explain herself. She simply gave the smallest nod, as if to acknowledge his order, and turned on her heel to leave. But in that turn, as her jacket swung, something caught the eye of the men standing off to the side. They were Navy SEALs, freshly returned from training drills, their uniforms marked with salt and sweat, their boots caked in dirt. These men had seen things most never dared to imagine, and yet in that moment, all bravado drained from their faces. A single SEAL, tall and scarred, froze in place. His jaw tightened, his hand paused mid-gesture, and his eyes locked onto the faded stitching on the back of her jacket. He blinked once, as though making sure he wasn't seeing things. Then he whispered it, low and hoarse. "No way." The others turned their heads. And one by one, they saw it too. The jacket wasn't just a jacket. It carried a call sign. Bold letters, slightly worn from years of weather and flight, but unmistakable. Letters that carried weight in the kind of circles where names weren't spoken aloud. The Admiral hadn't noticed yet. His back was turned, his mind already moving on to whatever else needed his wrath that day. But the SEALs knew. They felt the air change, felt the sudden heaviness of realization drop into their stomachs. She kept walking, her boots steady, her silence louder than anything she could have said. And that silence, that calm defiance, was exactly what made the ground crews, the SEALs, even a few of the pilots watching, lean closer, their curiosity tightening into something sharper. The Admiral finally noticed the shift. He heard the whispers. He saw the way hardened men who never blinked under fire, suddenly stood straighter, quieter, like statues carved by discipline. His brow furrowed, irritation flashing across his face. "What the hell is going on here?" he demanded, spinning on his heel. The SEALs didn't answer. Not yet. They didn't need to. Their silence was enough, their stillness louder than words. The Admiral's eyes followed their gaze, and only then did he see it. The letters stitched across her jacket. At first, his mind refused to process it. Call signs were just nicknames, just markers pilots used in the air. But this one was different. It wasn't just another name scrawled on a flight suit. It was a legend. The Admiral's chest tightened, though he masked it well, jaw locking into place. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came. His authority, for the first time in years, was slipping, not by argument, not by defiance, but by the weight of 5 faded letters and what they meant. And she didn't even look back. The call sign burned across her jacket like a flare in the night. Valkyrie. The letters were slightly faded, the stitching worn from years of exposure to sweat, sun, and flight hours no one could count. But there was no mistaking it. The SEALs who caught sight of it didn't just stare, they froze. Their training taught them to mask surprise, but some shocks ran deeper than discipline. One of them, a burly man with a scar running down his temple, had heard the stories firsthand. Not rumors passed around in bars, but whispered recollections from men who swore they'd been saved by a ghost in the sky. His chest tightened. He had never seen her face before, but that word stitched in black thread might as well have been a lightning strike through the past. He remembered sitting in a hangar years ago, hearing a commander quietly mention, the Valkyrie, with something close to reverence. Another SEAL, younger, his hair still short from a fresh buzz cut, swallowed hard. He had grown up on those whispers. Late nights in training, older men would talk about missions that had gone bad, missions where a single F-22 pilot had appeared out of nowhere and pulled them from certain death. No one ever gave her name. No one ever knew where she had come from. But the call sign lived on. A legend, a myth, a guardian from the skies. And now she was here, walking across a runway in broad daylight, looking no different than any other pilot, except that every step she took pressed deeper into their understanding of who stood before them. One SEAL moved first, not much, a shift in his stance, a tightening of his jaw, a slight raising of his chin. But the others noticed. Then another followed, his boots clicking together instinctively, as if his body had decided before his brain caught up. Within seconds, a ripple moved through them. Dozens of men, trained killers, warriors honed by fire and shadow, stiffened as though in the presence of something sacred. They didn't know whether to salute yet. But their bodies, their instincts, their very bones told them to. The Admiral's voice broke through. "What are you all staring at?" His tone carried irritation, not curiosity. He wasn't a man used to being ignored, and the sudden quiet obedience of the SEALs, directed at someone else, cut him deeper than he'd admit. No one answered him, not one. The woman, the Valkyrie, didn't slow. She didn't turn her head. She walked past them with the same unhurried calm she'd carried since the moment she stepped foot on the tarmac. Her eyes never strayed from the path ahead, but she knew. She felt the weight of their stares, the shift in the air, the way silence itself seemed to bow around her. Finally, one SEAL couldn't hold back. He moved forward a single step, his boots echoing against the concrete. Then his hand rose, fingers straight, thumb tucked, the motion crisp, precise, and deliberate. He saluted. The others saw it. They felt the break in the dam. One by one, they followed. Hands shot up in perfect unison, crisp salutes cutting through the sunlight. Not out of obligation, not out of chain of command. Out of respect, out of recognition, out of something that went deeper than military law. The Admiral froze. His face, hardened by decades of authority, shifted for the first time in years. Confusion flickered, then realization, then something colder, fear, maybe, though he would never admit it. His gaze fell on her jacket, on the letters he hadn't bothered to notice before. And when he read them, his chest constricted like a vice. He knew that call sign. Everyone in his position knew. But he had never believed the stories. He had dismissed them as wartime exaggeration, the kind of legend soldiers invented to comfort themselves. Yet here it was, walking casually. Across his runway, embodied in a woman he had just tried to dismiss. His jaw locked, his throat tightened. For a moment, he felt the weight of every order he had given, every word he had spoken to her, and he realized just how close he had come to making the worst mistake of his career. Around him, the base seemed to hold its breath. The ground crew had gone silent. Pilots had paused mid-step. Even the mechanics working under the wings of a fighter jet had stopped, their wrenches frozen in mid-turn. Everyone had noticed. Everyone had seen the SEALs, the most disciplined, battle-hardened men on the base, saluting a woman the Admiral had just kicked off. The Valkyrie finally stopped walking. Not because of the Admiral. Not because of the stairs. She paused because she wanted to. Slowly, almost lazily, she turned her head. Her eyes swept over the SEALs, then to the Admiral. Her expression didn't change. She didn't smile. She didn't scowl. But there was something in her gaze. Something sharp. Something ancient. Something that cut through the years of whispered legend and made it clear why her name carried weight. She had earned it, and the Admiral knew it. His lips parted, but no words came. He could order them all to stand down. He could bark until his throat bled. But the salutes wouldn't lower. Not here. Not now. Because this wasn't about rank anymore. This wasn't about regulation or chain of command. This was about respect. About history. About the unshakable truth that some legends weren't made by the system. They were made in the skies, in the fire, in the chaos where life and death balanced on a knife's edge. And the woman standing before them wasn't just a pilot. She was the Valkyrie. The Admiral's throat tightened as silence settled across the base, a silence so deep it seemed to crush the sound of engines and wind. Every man on the tarmac stood frozen, salutes raised like a wall of steel, their eyes fixed not on him, not on the rows of aircraft, but on her. The Valkyrie. The name he had dismissed as rumor was now stitched in faded thread on the jacket of the woman he had just tried to throw out. He had spent his career teaching men that authority flowed from rank, that respect was earned by medals and orders. But this was different. This was a force he couldn't control. Her presence was dismantling the chain of command in front of his eyes. Not with shouts, not with defiance, but with quiet gravity. The men who feared nothing, men who had looked death in the face, were giving her something no order could demand. His gaze flicked over the SEALs, their hands locked in crisp salutes, their jaws set like granite. Then his eyes shifted back to her. She hadn't raised a hand, hadn't spoken a word. She only looked at him with a steady calm that cut deeper than anger ever could. And in that look, he saw something he hadn't felt in years: shame. Because he remembered. Years ago, before his rank had made him untouchable, before the medals had stacked across his chest, he had sat in a darkened briefing room listening to reports of a mission gone wrong. A SEAL team, pinned behind enemy lines. Extraction impossible. No air support within range. The mission commander had written them off as lost. But then, at the bottom of the after-action report, scribbled in ink darker than the rest, there was a single line: F-22 support pilot designated Valkyrie executed unsanctioned maneuver, broke through radar, neutralized threats, and extracted SEAL Team Alpha. All men alive, he had scoffed at the time. One plane against that kind of firepower. Impossible. Pilots died every day trying half as much. He chalked it up to embellishment, the kind of legend soldiers told to make sense of miracles. And yet, here she stood. Flesh and blood, real. The memory twisted in his gut. He remembered the names of the men on that mission. One of them had been his own brother. He had never spoken of it, never admitted the guilt of knowing his brother had walked home because some nameless pilot had disobeyed orders. He had always assumed the story was exaggerated. That the rescue had been luck, not skill. That the Valkyrie wasn't real. But the truth was now standing in front of him, wrapped in a jacket stitched with a call sign that had carried through years of whispered reverence. His knees felt weak, though he kept them locked. His pride told him to bark another order, to demand she leave, to reassert his authority. But his heart knew better. His heart told him he was standing in the presence of someone who had done what he never could. Around him, the base still held its breath. The ground crew stared, helmets tucked under their arms. Pilots leaned against the wings of jets, their smirks gone, their bodies rigid with respect. Even the young recruits, who had no idea what the call sign meant, could feel it, the shift in the air, the weight pressing down on them. The Valkyrie stood motionless, her jacket swaying lightly in the breeze, her eyes locked on his. She didn't need to remind him of what she had done. She didn't need to explain who she was. The truth was in the way every SEAL's salute held steady, unflinching, like a wall of loyalty built not for rank but for her. The Admiral swallowed hard, his throat dry. He felt the sting of pride breaking apart, the cracks running through years of iron authority. For the first time in decades, he moved not out of command but out of respect. Slowly, his hand rose. Fingers straight, thumb tucked. The salute was sharp, deliberate, and heavy with the weight of all the years he had doubted her. The effect was electric. The moment his hand snapped to his brow, the silence deepened. The ground seemed to hum with it, the air vibrating with a reverence that words couldn't hold. It wasn't just an acknowledgement, it was a surrender. The Admiral, the man who ruled this base with an iron fist, was saluting the woman he had tried to cast out. Her gaze softened, just barely. A nod, almost imperceptible, dipped her chin. And then she returned it. Her hand rose, steady, unhurried, carrying with it the weight of every life she had saved, every battle she had flown through, every whisper that had carved her into legend. The SEALs didn't lower their salutes. Not yet. They held them as she turned, as she walked toward the waiting F-22 at the far end of the runway. Her boots echoed in the silence, each step striking like a drumbeat, marking the end of one era and the beginning of another. The Admiral's arm lowered slowly, his chest heavy with something he hadn't felt since his first day in uniform, humility. Around him, no one moved until she reached the aircraft. And when she climbed the ladder, sliding into the cockpit with the ease of someone who belonged to the sky more than the ground, the SEALs finally broke formation. Not with words, not with cheers, but with the kind of silence that said more than noise ever could. Engines roared to life, the sound tearing through the quiet, rattling the windows of hangars and shaking the bones of every man on the tarmac. The F-22 taxied forward, sleek and deadly, its nose catching the sunlight. And when the Valkyrie lifted off, the jet slicing into the sky with impossible grace, every eye followed her. For a long time after she disappeared into the clouds, no one spoke. The Admiral stood rooted in place, the weight of what had just happened pressing down on him. He knew his career would never be the same. His authority had been shaken, not destroyed, but reshaped. He understood now that there were forces greater than rank, greater than protocol. Forces born in fire and sky, forces like her. The SEALs exchanged glances, quiet but fierce. They had saluted a legend today, and legends didn't fade. They became part of you. They became the standard by which everything else was measured. And somewhere above, beyond the reach of their eyes, the Valkyrie flew on. Not for recognition, not for medals, but because the sky was where she belonged. Because legends didn't stay on the ground. They soared, and the base would never forget the day she reminded them of it.